Hey, how's it going, everybody? My name is Brett Hall, and today we're going to talk a little bit about Cisco Hyperflex, especially as it pertains to how it can be used to increase the availability of your applications, and also how it can be used to fit in to your organization's disaster recovery plan. So, if you're a UC guy and you're watching this video, you may ask yourself, why are we doing this? I don't even really know what Hyperflex is. So let me just kind of explain why we're doing this and help explain a little bit about what Hyperflex is. So Hyperflex essentially converges different silos that exist across many different organizations. Um, the server environment, the storage environment, and then the networking environment. And it's important because sometimes these teams don't always get along or talk very well. And Hyperflex essentially provides a integrated, converged solution to simplify the management of the most important things across your organization, which is the applications running on top of the virtual environment. Um, so with that, we have tight integrations with VMware, and you can do a lot of things that are very straightforward and simple in nature, straight from the Hyperflex management dashboard. And also, why we're doing this is because I've been exploring different types of solutions that could help organizations with their disaster recovery plan and strategy. And I was able to get my hands on some Hyperflex equipment recently and wanted to play around and see, what all the hoopla was all about. And I gotta say, overall, first impression is very good. Some of the immediate benefits that I see with Hyperflex, again, is the simplicity. I really enjoy the dashboard that Cisco provides and how it can be used as a single pane of glass for viewing the performance of your storage and compute environments. Uh, I appreciate how it ties into the network and how you can actually configure things like data replication that reside over the network and how you can tune the data replication so it doesn't crash or overwhelm the network. That's pretty nice, and I'll show you what that looks like here in a few minutes. But also just like the additional layer that Hyperflex can provide out of the box to increase the availability of your data. Um, we'll get into this in a second, but just real quickly, the Hyperflex solution itself, um, it really helps with the storage aspect, right? Some people might say that Hyperflex is software-defined storage, and as we software define the storage, one of the things that I notice out of the box that Hyperflex provides is mirroring of data. So for traditional applications, this is super important, and most of you are probably already doing this with your existing storage area networks. Whether you're using Hitachi or NetApp or whatever you have. But but since I'm not a storage guy, I'm not a server guy, I really can't appreciate how easy it is from a Hyperflex point of view to configure these types of things. From from a UC perspective, I know that some of these applications have built-in disaster recovery systems for you to be able to, back up your data and to do that, right? And in a very streamlined manner. It also the restoration of the data is pretty straightforward with Cisco's built-in DRS. But if you're not backing up, every day, you could see how you potentially might have a loss of data, right? The fact that Hyperflex is constantly mirroring its data into the storage area environment using these storage controllers in a software-defined way, it ensures that you're never going to lose any of your data. And again, I'll show you that here in a second. So now that I've kind of walked through some of the high level benefits, let's take a look at the Hyperflex console. So this is my vCenter. We'll come back to this here in a second. This is the Hyperflex Connect dashboard. And as you can see, there's a lot of different things here. I'll just focus in on a few different key areas. This is a Hyperflex Edge cluster, meaning I don't have fabric interconnects. I don't have the UCS manager built into my environment, but I still have a lot of the goodness that comes with Hyperflex. One of the things about that is I can't really expand my Hyperflex deployment today because I'm using Edge, but I hear that's coming in a future release of code. I think it's coming in the 5.0 version of Hyperflex. So I'm using these C220 servers, and they're basically just tied into a normal Catalyst 9000 switch that I had in my environment. From a storage perspective, you can see right off the top, we have roughly 9 terabytes worth of data in my cluster. And by default, the storage controllers are helping optimize the utilization of data by doing things like compression of the data and also deduplication of the data. And so if you think about this, again, if you're not a storage guy, I'll just do a quick little explanation. As we mirror data to other different nodes across the cluster, it's effectively creating a copy of the data, right? And so that copy of the data, what it mainly provides is resiliency, but it also consumes storage. And if you're building out a Hyperflex environment, surely you want to account for that secondary or tertiary copy of the data. That's why it's important for the software to do things like compression and deduplicate that secondary or tertiary copy of the data to optimize the storage capacity that you have across your cluster. We also see things like the number of VMs that I have in my cluster, the throughput, the IOPS. But I'm just going to focus in on the health for 1 second. If I just kind of click on this little eye circle thing, you can see here what I'm talking about with what Cisco calls the data replication factor. And as you can see here, I have that set for 2, which means I have 2 copies of my data for all the different VMs that run across my cluster. I have 2 copies of the data. And sometimes, depending on what your disaster recovery plan is, you may want to bump this up. You may want to have 3 copies of the data. But for me right now, 2 is certainly sufficient. What also is pretty interesting is, part of this Hyperflex deployment says, hey, look, I have a clustered environment. If one of your 3 nodes fails, like goes kaput, we can tolerate one of those. So it's very resiliency. And I don't know if this is true. I've been told that Cisco Hyperflex, just by using these kind of out-of-the-box features, has the ability to reduce an organization's downtime of their applications by 90%, which is pretty staggering, actually. So now that you see kind of like the front dashboard view, there's a few different tabs I'm going to click on real quick. If you're familiar with disaster recovery, you'll understand that data replication is one of the important facets of ensuring your data is always available. And I don't have a secondary Hyperflex cluster, but if I did, I could go in here and configure the network to use for replicating data. And let's just say my storage network or my replication network is VLAN 500. I could go in here and configure that, and go in and I'll I'll skip past this IP stuff here in a second, but what's pretty interesting is I have the ability to tune how much network bandwidth my replication data consumes. And so um, if for some reason I have other jobs that are, you know, replicating across the network at night, I can make sure that, this doesn't overwhelm those other jobs, right? I can go as low as 10, which is, yeah, this is right here. I can go as low as 10 megabits per second, or as high as 33,000 megabits per second, which is around 33 gigs worth of throughput. Not that you would have a wide area network that is 33 gigs, but maybe you would. I've seen some customer requirements for 100 gig of performance these days. So this is pretty interesting, right? You have the ability to tune the network performance. Other view that I'll show you real quick is again the entire cluster and the system that I have deployed. You have things like your IP address of the vCenter. You can click on this and open up your vCenter. I won't do that right now. I'll flip over to vCenter here in a second. You see the different nodes that I have in the cluster and the software versions of the hypervisor itself. So my vCenter, my vCenter, it's not shown here. I am running 6.7, but my hypervisor itself is this version, the 6.7.0 version. Then you have your controller I talked about earlier, your software-defined storage controller, and then you have your individual disks here, right? So I can hover over the disk and get information about those disks. I have the ability of, doing cool things like turning on a locator, right? So if I want to find a disk in my node, I can turn that on, and I think it blinks blue. I'm not quite sure. What's kind of interesting about Hyperflex, I think, is the ability to easily scale up as well. And so it's kind of a bad example here because I'm only using these small C220 Hyperflex nodes. But if I had a larger C240 node that had more slots for disks, I think they have 20, I would basically see this little box with dashes around it that were empty. And as these drives started to populate or fill up, I should say, I could easily see that occurring and then just go out and get some additional disks to drop into these empty slots. The Hyperflex system, I'm told, would recognize that a new disk has been inserted and immediately be able to start using that disk for the storage requirements that your organization has. So that's that. Like I said earlier, I'm using an edge deployment, so I don't have fabric interconnects here. But there are still some nice ways to be able to configure the network and to tune the network. I have the virtual machines, and again, I can easily, go back and forth to these different individual tabs from this front dashboard here. But if I click on these virtual machines, you can see the different virtual machines I've configured, and I've just only started building these out, right? But if you're familiar with 12.5, you know that 12.5 requires smart licensing, meaning there's a smart licensing portal on Cisco.com, and in order to get authorization or entitlement for your UC applications, there needs to be some sort of sync with the smart satellite or smart licensing portal. The on-prem server has the ability to deploy this server on-prem, and so all of your UC applications can just point to this on-prem server, and then periodically I would just go out and do some sort of data sync or data exchange from within my smart licensing server to make sure my UC applications always have enough licensing. So I just started building out this communications manager. I got a publisher configured. I also have an IMNP server. Eventually, I'll go out and I'll build a Unity connection server and maybe some expressways and maybe emergency responder. Not quite sure yet. Depends on how much time I have on the side. But um, but yeah, I mean, you can see the different applications that are running within your environment and how much they're using. I think the reason why this one is the way that it is, how it's only using 94 gig is I think I thin provisioned it whenever I built it. So it's kind of interesting. I think for this one, I must have thick provisioned the installation when I deployed the OVA. But uh, but yeah, hopefully this information is beneficial to you, and hopefully it helps you see some of the benefits that deploying your mission critical business applications on top of Hyperflex can provide, and um, and also your UC applications. Um, one other layer of redundancy that I think is pretty informational or beneficial. I'll quickly show you is um, is this idea of ready clones. And so if you think about it, right, we're we're using our storage controller VMs, which I'll show you here in a second, to stripe data across these drives and ensure the data always has at least two copies on my storage environment. But if you want to create a clone that's ready to take the place of your publisher, for example, uh, we have this integration with vCenter to easily do that. And so let me just quickly show you what kind of happens if I want to create like a clone of my communications manager publisher. I can go in here and just say I want to create one clone, and I'm going to say let's just call it pub clone. The name of the clone is going to be called pub clone one. And if I really wanted to create more than one clone for whatever reason, I could do that. Maybe that's to help start getting focused on some kind of like DevOps principles, right? Where you're testing some API calls to communications manager. I don't quite know yet, but watch how fast this actually clones my communications manager publisher. Um, Flip over to vCenter and I hit, yeah, I didn't have to hit refresh. You can see it's already there, right? Simply because all I'm doing is I'm using my storage controller and I'm pointing to where my data of my publisher resides. I don't have to uh, take the steps necessary to go into like the individual host and copy all of this data into this new clone like I would do if I had to, a VM running on my traditional ESXi hosts. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and it kind of talks about the performance benefits that Hyperflex can provide. You can see the VMs here. They're just kind of deployed, right? I mean, they're actually pinned to each individual host. You can see my satellite server, my publisher are actually pinned to 102. And then from my 103 host is hosting my my MMP host. Oh, and it's also hosting my new pub clone. You can see I didn't really do anything to say, hey, I want my pub clone to go on 103. It just used the built-in kind of like software-defined storage to figure out the best placement for that clone. So it's pretty neat. Here are your individual storage controllers. You can see this V2MY storage controller is actually looking at the third host, and again, it's the one responsible for mirroring data across other disks and things of that nature. So hopefully this information was helpful for you, and again, seeing what types of benefits that Hyperflex can help provide your organization as you look at adding different layers of resiliency to make sure your data is always available. And if you have any questions about any of this topic, feel free to drop a question in the comments box and hit like and um, hit subscribe for future videos. Appreciate you watching this entire video if you watched this far, and I just hope you have a great day. Take care.